How's it going, guys? So I'm here to talk about submitting to apps in China. And even if you're not interested in submitting your apps in China, I'm going to talk also about just submitting apps in general and what it takes to be a good app on the App Store. And so hopefully it'll still be useful, even if going international is not what you're looking at right now. So let's get started. So what are we here to talk about? The first point I want to go through is kind of what makes an app successful in general and what makes an app profitable. We're also going to then dive into what makes an app successful in China, which is a very different place. We'll get into the details a little later. Also want to talk about actually how you can ship an app in China, and there is a lot of stuff that has to go right for you to be able to do that. Things with the Chinese government and so forth. But first, let me give a little background on who I am, the company I work for, and the game we've developed, so that you know what's going on here. So I'm a Xamarin MVP, and I authored a book. It has a really long title, but I'm working on the second edition. I'm thinking about naming it The Pragmatic Xamarin Cross-Platform Application Development for Dummies. So be on the lookout for that, just so that we get some good SEO on the book title right there. So I work on both business apps and games. We're about half and half at Hitcents in the app department. So I have a wide range of experience from different kinds of apps. And I've been doing C# since I graduated college. So a little bit about Hitcents. It's a company based in Bowling Green, Kentucky. It was started by two twin brothers, and I think it was around 1999. They originally focused on the web, and then expanded to desktop development, and then with mobile, we've really started embracing Xamarin and doing cross-platform development on mobile. We also like to make some bold claims, like our president here. We don't follow trends, we set them. So, well, maybe we'll see in some of the apps we've built here. So we built an app recently you may have seen called the Hanks Writer. Tom Hanks had the brilliant idea that he wanted a vintage typewriter on an iPad. And so we got to work with him, and we used Xamarin, put it out on iOS. But then the app we're going to talk about here mostly is called Stickman EPIC. And it's written with Monogame and C#. We use Xamarin on iOS and Android. But it's on many other platforms like Windows Phone, Windows 8, Mac, Linux. We were on a Humble bundle recently, too, where we had to do that. So, but this kind of defines our two areas of what we do at Hitcents. We do apps for hire or consulting, and then we also do our own in-house games. So let's talk about Stickman. So the idea came about in one of our artists / web developers had this idea that he wanted to draw a stickman and see him come to life. And so he really asked, his name was Phil Williams. He asked to do this in his spare time. And so he built out this website called drawstickman.com. And we launched it as, just kind of maybe a little promotional thing to learn about Hitcents. And it really blew up and went viral. Within a couple days, we had 10 million visitors, something we had not ever seen before with something we put out there. So with the success of Stickman on the web, we really knew, building a little web episode, it was about 2 minutes to finish. There's not a lot of revenue opportunity there, but we knew that people loved it. So we had the idea that, hey, we want to make a full-length game, and we were already using Xamarin. And so we wanted to write it in Monogame. And that's where we came up with the idea of Stickman EPIC. It's very similar to the original website. It's just a lot bigger world. Everything is more colorful. Well, at least it's brown. You can see. But it's a fun game. Kids love it, and it's been a great success for us as well. So something happened. Through the process of creating EPIC, we translated it into 12 languages. Just, we're pretty new to developing games on our own and put them out there. So we wanted to find out, what kind of return on investment you could make by translating your game. So we picked an off-the-shelf translator. Apple has a list of approved translation companies. So we picked one we liked, and we put it out there. And we also threw Google Analytics in the game. And something really strange we happened to notice was that China was dark blue, and the rest of the world was this other color. And we have no downloads in China from Google Play or the App Store. So what we discovered, our app was being pirated. It was on several Chinese app stores across, Apparently, anyone can submit an Android APK and get it out there for free, or share it, And so we were very surprised that we had this many Chinese users to play our game, which we don't even know if it's translated well. The developers, we can't even read the text we put in there. And so we wanted to be able to invest in this opportunity of users in China to see, what we could do. So first, let's talk about what makes an app successful. This is another app we did called the Harlem Shake. If you've ever heard of the Harlem Shake, it was a meme a few years ago. It's pretty ridiculous. A guy was dancing to a video, and that's basically all you need to know. But so successful apps are either fun or useful. And this app was definitely not useful, but it was fun. So games are normally under the fun category, while useful could be an app that you actually use to do something like Uber or Twitter or Facebook or something. Another thing successful apps always have is the correct pricing model for the app. In this case, the Harlem Shake app was free to download. And once you made the video in the app that went along with the song, you could pay to share it or send the video somewhere, which makes sense for this app because we wanted maximum exposure, maximum users, and to make a little bit of money off of it. Also, a great title, app icon, and screenshots. This app, we had one of our artists from Stickman EPIC. She did a great job with that guy on the logo. And we also happened to get the app name The Harlem Shake, which really helped us appear to be the #1 Harlem Shake app when we first came out. Great apps also have a fan base or some marketing momentum behind them. In this case, we had a very popular meme. It was basically free advertising for us because people would search Harlem Shake in the App Store, and that's not anything we had to pay for or anything like that. And then the last one, that successful apps actually work, which we try to make our apps work, so hopefully you do too. So let's go over the pricing models. There's obviously premium apps, which would be an app that is feature complete. You just pay 99 cents or $2.99, and that's it. There's freemium, which is basically a free app where there's all kinds of in-app purchases to unlock things, or there could just be one purchase to unlock the rest of the app. There's also Paymium, and this is a premium app with in-app purchases. And this is starting to get popular for games with additional content, or maybe you put out an update for new levels. So that makes sense a lot of times too. And last but not least is the free model, which generally ad supported. There's not much money to be made, but if you're a guy on your own, just trying to make a few bucks, it makes sense for you, then you could do that. There's also, Flappy Bird is an obvious exception to this, but building Flappy Bird would be like winning the lottery anyway. So here's a little chart of the percentage of total revenue in games. And you can see that freemium is 90% of the pie, with premium and paymium behind. And then you take a look at the App Store. You could probably even look right now, and it's almost ridiculous to look at the top grossing apps right now. You have Clash of Clans, Candy Crush, and they're all free games where you spend a ridiculous amount of money to get coins or whatever. But this doesn't mean it's best for you or your app. And there's a lot of reasons for this. First of all, these guys have a lot of money, a huge marketing team, development team. They have server infrastructure, budgets to buy ads. Some of these guys are making so much money that they just buy all the ads they can because they know their average revenue per user is a little higher than what the ad costs, or pretty close. So. They also require a huge amount of A/B testing. So these guys optimize for clicks to not necessarily trick, but get the user to purchase things through their game. And so that takes focus testing and a lot of things that if you're a small team, you can't really accomplish. Another thing to remember is not all apps should be freemium. Niche apps that appeal to a small group of people, or the example I always use is another monogame game called Infinite Flight. It really appeals to people who like flight simulators. Well, that could be a pilot, or maybe someone in the military, but it's not really something that a 12-year-old girl would play. So apps like that, you could charge $4.99 and get away with it. Well, not get away, but and then only certain game genres could even be freemium. You think about a game like Zelda, or some kind of adventure game, or even Stickman EPIC. It would be tough to really get in-app purchases. We'll tell how we did it in China, but a little later. And then, of course, if you have a small team, I don't think you should try to target the freemium market. So what should you do? Well, premium is still a really good option. If any of us in this room built one of these 3 games, I think we'd be happy with the amount of money we made. So, of course, we all know Minecraft. Every little kid in the world is probably playing right now. But it's always been a premium app. Monument Valley is also a really, really great app if you've seen it on iOS. It's a puzzle adventure game. And I hear soon that they're coming out with potential update with another purchase for more levels. So, and Oceanhorn is similar. It's kind of like Zelda, Ocarina of Time, or a game like that. It's on iPad. It's also done really well with premium. So let's now kind of shift gears and talk about what makes apps successful in China. And before we do that, I'm going to kind of give an overview of what the app market is like in China, and what smartphones and users are like in China. Probably one of the biggest impacts is that game consoles have been banned in China until very recently in 2013. And so what this means is that PC gaming is huge, but not everyone has a PC. And so now that smartphones are really taking the world by storm, someone getting a smartphone in China is really their first time to play a video game, or first time to have a personal computer. Like, a smartphone really is the gateway into, the future for them. Another thing interesting, most important stat here is that Apple is only 1% of the smartphone sales in China. You see articles all the time talking about them doing well there, but the fact is that iPhones are really expensive to the average Chinese consumer. Only the very rich would have an iPhone currently. And so what that means is Android completely dominates China. We have Samsung, Huawei, and Coolpad, and even Lenovo, I think, is the next one on the list. And these aren't necessarily manufacturers that we see in the US that much, except for Samsung. And of course, cheap Android phones are everywhere in China. They build them there. So you can go down the street and look in a $5 bin, or you could get a smartphone for potentially $30 or so. And so that means that Android is really where you have to focus your efforts to get an app going in China. And another thing to keep in mind is that most of China doesn't speak English. So it's very important that you have a good translation. And in our game, just using that company, we really didn't get a good translation from our first attempt. So it's always best to get a second party to test your translations that is fluent and knows your game, and they know the context of what's on the screen, because otherwise things could be wrong and you don't know. So another thing to keep in mind is a lot of people in China don't know who Santa Claus is. In our game we had a winter level with elves and things like that, and throwing snowballs, and that doesn't really connect with Chinese users. They don't know they don't have any cultural background on that. To put that in perspective, you think about how many Chinese holidays that you really know about. Maybe we kind of know about the Chinese New Year, but they have a lot more holidays than that. So we like to say that when you internationalize an app, it's not just localization, but you also need to focus on culturalization. So anything in your app that only a Western user would understand, you might consider making something special for China or other countries. Another issue, piracy in China, as we saw earlier, is a pretty big deal. This is a heat map of the LVL library on Android. The red countries are the ones where most piracy is going on. And of course, China's up there with Russia and a few others. Some other things that contribute to this is Google Play is not really in China at all. You can get it, and you can get free apps, but most users don't even have it pre-installed on their phone. And so what this has created is this, you have all these cheap phones, you have tons of small app stores popping up everywhere, and many of them have pirated content, like we found out with our Stickman game. And then you can also, piracy is, it's hard to explain, but you can also buy DVDs in local shops all over China, and the main reason is, international intellectual property, like IPs, is not something China makes a lot of money on, so the government doesn't care to enforce it. So here's a nice picture of this is a shop down the street. I had one of our Chinese employees take a picture. So there are some Western movies in there. I see Jason Statham on the right. So another thing to take note of is they call it the Great Firewall of China. Many social networks and web services that we know and love are not in China. There's a lot of reasons for this. So, to get a public IP address or a domain, you have to have a Chinese business license and apply for these with the Chinese government. And they also require a certain level of access to your data. So if Facebook wanted to be in China, they would have to give the Chinese government some access to monitor their users. And a lot of US companies aren't, ready to do that. And so as a result, China has its own version of many of these Western websites. For example, you might have heard of Sina Weibo. I might not be pronouncing that right. I'm from Kentucky, so. But you might have seen it if you've done any iOS development. There are some APIs to interact with this web service, which I think is smart on Apple's part. And this is a screenshot of our Stickman Sina Weibo page. You also can watch videos on Youku instead of YouTube. That's pretty interesting. That's pretty close to what we would think of as YouTube. It even looks the same, almost. I mean, there's Chinese words on it, but. So, that's one thing to keep in mind is if you have any social interactions in your game or app, which most apps should have some kind of social interactions, you really need to know what social networks and other things you need to target. So here's an example of an app store in China. I think this one is 360. But they have a lot of names, many that I can't pronounce or say, like Wanduija, or numbers and things. But one thing that's interesting is, of course, you have the carriers, like their version of AT&T would have their own app store. And then you also have the handset manufacturers like Lenovo or Huawei that also have their own app store. So there are legitimate app stores in China, for sure. Just a lot. Another thing that's very interesting is that their app stores are not, like in the US, we kind of take for granted that the top 10 is the real top 10. And it's not necessarily true in China. Some might be. They also, just like in the US, they'll take a percentage of any money you make. But the way purchases work is you also have to pay a percent to carriers. So you actually make maybe around 40% of the total sale of when you sell something in China. So what does this all mean for my app? I think the biggest one is to keep piracy in your mind at all times. Your app should be freemium. If it costs money, then they would pirate it. And your game should also have a lot of small transactions. You can have an in-app purchase that is as small as 16 cents in China, or in the US, Apple has set that 99-cent limit. But it makes sense that when you have so many users over there that they don't make necessarily as much money as someone in the West for there to be small transactions. Your app should also be as small of a file size as possible. And this is pretty important because a lot of cell phone plans are prepaid in China, and they pay per megabyte. And so if everything is free, what they pay to get your app is how many megabytes it takes to download your app. So that could be, it's getting better. We're starting to see 50 megabyte games in China. But they used to say that you needed to be around 5 or so, and that could be really tough to do depending on your game. Your app also has to run well on low-powered Android devices. Think about anything running Gingerbread or higher is still, you could lower it even lower than that, maybe Android 2.2. You would even be able to get more users that way. You also will need an excellent Chinese translation. And take in mind all these cultural changes you might need to make to your app as well. And of course, you will definitely need some kind of Chinese marketing team that knows the local country, the local culture, be able to post on social media, answer questions, and of course, manage all those app store relationships that we saw how many there were earlier. And don't forget about piracy. So if you have, just an example, if you have a save game in your app, you might consider encrypting it to some extent. You might consider obfuscating your app or things like that. So let's talk about how do you ship an app in China. Well, we took the approach, this is a picture of the two twin brothers, Chris and Clinton, that started the company, and their father, Ed. They're our executives at Hitcents. The first thing they did was actually go to China. They wanted to figure out how can we legitimately sell our app, and what can we do about our app that's currently being pirated. Well, it turns out you can't really do anything about your app being pirated. It's already out there. But what we could do was create a better version for China than the pirated one. We could fix our translations, culturalize the game, change the purchasing model, and just make it a better game for China so that they would rather have our better version than the one we just straight translated. So in this process, we opened a small office in China. That's not our whole building. We just have one room or something in there. And we hired an employee or two. And that got us a Chinese business license, a bank account, and all these things that we needed to get started submitting apps in China. So let's talk about how the purchases actually work. In-app purchases in China go through carrier billing, which you may not be familiar with. It's not something that we really do in the US, but it's kind of strange. It sends an SMS message from your phone to your carrier, and that money just gets taken off your bill. And so many users have prepaid plans. It's the same as if they made a call or sent a text message. It would just come out of their bill just the same as anything else. There's a lot of reasons it works this way. Credit card fraud is fairly prevalent in China, so they don't want to take credit cards, especially when the person is in there, and that like in e-commerce scenario and things like that. And then many users also do not have a bank account because, once again, to get a bank account, you have to go through the Chinese government, which is a lot of hassle that the average Chinese consumer doesn't do. And of course, like I said, most cell phone plans are prepaid. But there is another payment option called Alipay. You may have heard of this company, but it's kind of like the PayPal of China. At least it doesn't sound like PayPal. But you can also pay in a lot of apps and games through Alipay. And so think about, what does this mean for me as a developer, is that I have to make these purchases work, and they can go through a lot of different payment methods. So, some of the carriers, some of the more popular ones are China Unicom, China Mobile, China Telecom. They each have their own SDK that you have to integrate in your app. And then if you want to support Alipay, that's a fourth SDK you have to integrate in your app. And this is a screenshot of some documentation that you can see an Android manifest file. It looks pretty normal, but then you see all the Chinese words all around it. So you can imagine how hard it is to figure this out. But it is interesting. So because of the amount of piracy and hacking going on, each of these SDKs has its own anti-hack measures for securing their payments. And these SDKs are not very dev-friendly at all. And the result is your app contains all these crazy files that you're not sure what they are. So it's very strange. There are jar files in your assets folder. If you know anything about Android, that's just really strange to ship a jar file inside your app instead of compiling it into your app. So there is something like maybe 100 files, strange files we had to add to each app because we were supporting 4 different payment types. In addition to this, each app store has its own rules. So each store has a different package name, and there's some reasons to that. If they had a problem recently where people were using the same package name across all the Chinese app stores, and a user might have 2 app stores on their phone. And so if they bought it from App Store A, and an update came out, App Store B got the push notification up first. They would install from App Store B over top of the App Store A version, and then App Store B would start getting the revenue from that update. So now they require a unique package name for each store, which there might have been a better way to solve that problem, but this does it, so that's what they went with. Some stores require a custom app icon and splash screen. The bigger ones, they'll want you to put your logo in the corner as a brand thing that they offer their customers. And then even the biggest ones might want exclusive content, like for one store we created a special level just for them, and it had their mascot on the corner, but they loved it. So, and when they have control of the top 10, it's a good idea to keep the App Store guys happy. And each App Store might have a different, some App Stores might not let you pay certain methods. So each project is going to have a different set of SDKs. Boom. And then some App Stores don't even let you use social media because maybe they don't like it, or they have their own social media network that isn't in your app. And so there's kind of a few options here. So this is a screenshot of our Visual Studio solution, and there is a lot of projects. There's 45 projects. Some enterprise guys would say that's nothing, but that's still pretty big for an app. We could have maybe made one project and had a bunch of complicated MS build rules, but we just took the simpler approach where we could copy-paste the project as a starting point and maybe fix a few things. So one of the things that is really, really beneficial, which you really need to do it, well, in our case, is to unit test your game and your app. Just in general, it's a good practice. In our case, we actually unit test our project files to make sure that there's nothing missing. And this is just kind of a screenshot of each store with the unit test passing. If there weren't this many files, I would not want to do this, but this caught so many bugs that we would have had otherwise. So it validates things like we have the appropriate package name, the appropriate things in the Android manifest, any missing files. Each SDK we have for each store, it makes sure that everything's set up for each SDK. And to go along with this, continuous integration, there's a few talks on this, but I feel like it really is a must when you have this many apps that you need to ship. If I had, we package around 33 different APKs for China right now, and I could not imagine going through the wizard in Visual Studio or Xamarin Studio to make 30 APKs when we need to make a build. Like, it's just not feasible, not something I want to sit there and do. So, and we also liked having some amount of automated testing. We have unit tests that run against the game logic, and then our tests that validate the projects. Having that in place to make sure you don't break a build is a pretty nice thing to have. And of course, we still had to do manual testing. It's pretty difficult to test all these payments. And in some cases, we couldn't even test them in the US because you had to have an active SIM card. And so our Chinese team had to take over that. We do have some QA testers in the US that would catch some things, but they couldn't test payments, so it was pretty tough for them. But telling a guy, hey, you need to test 30 builds, it's not a fun thing to have to tell them. So let's talk about what we did in the Stickman game, in regards to culturalization, and then how did we monetize. So we created a culturalized version of Draw Stickman EPIC. It is a lot more than just a good translation. We created a new logo and a name that appeals to Chinese users. There's actually not a Chinese word for for Stickman. And there is some kind of like local fairy tale that is this guy, there's a match that comes to life. And it made sense to name the game Draw Matchman and use that fairy tale's name. That makes a lot of sense. It probably really appeals to Chinese users. Axes, in the game, there's an axe pencil, and you draw it, and you can chop down a tree or open a door, or chop down a door, sorry. And I think there's a bad association with axes in China. It's kind of like they think of it as a murder weapon. So we didn't want to use that in the game. We used swords instead, because swords are a lot more honorable, and it's just something that they like. Obviously, there's a lot of medieval castles in the game, kind of Western style. They're stone, and it made a lot more sense to just turn that into an authentic Chinese-looking building, like you saw in the picture earlier. So how did we monetize in China? It's an adventure game. It didn't really fit well to be freemium, but here's what we did, and I think it worked out pretty well. It's a free app. First 2 levels are free. And on level 3, we had to purchase the cloud pencil in which you needed to complete that level. And that price is 4 RMB, which is about $1 or 99 cents, which is still cheaper than the US version, which is $1.99 on phones and $2.99 on iPads. And this is important that the game needed to be playable because app stores, even in China, won't let you submit a game that's not playable without buying something. We also added a currency of diamonds that you can buy various items in the game that wasn't necessarily there in the US version at all. We added hints for puzzles on each level. We know that they could just go to social media and probably figure out the puzzle, but this was just a quick thing that you could spend diamonds on. Because the puzzles are kind of hard, I'll say. The armor pencil is a 99-cent purchase in the US, and it basically gives you an extra life from your guy dying. It's an expendable in China, and so it's a single-use thing that you can buy with diamonds. We also created revives, which this is kind of, if you've ever played Temple Run, when you die, you can revive yourself and keep going for either some very rare currency or you can pay money straight up. And we just kind of did the same thing. Because we found that Chinese users were dying a lot, even US users do. So, and it's not fun to die in a game, but and the result is, we were featured on China Mobile, along with some other stores. And this is kind of what it looks like to be up on the store on the front page. A lot of the stores are web-based, and then they have an app to go along with it, an Android app. And there's some really weird-looking things on there. I can't tell you what some of those are. So the results, this is important. The purple one is all the China app stores aggregated together. And then the other 4 boxes are US-only revenue. And so just to compare, you can see that all of China still made a little more than all of iOS in the US. So it was a good amount of revenue in comparison. And Amazon, I wouldn't think it would be this way for everyone, but we made good money on Amazon because it's a kids game, and so it worked well on Kindles. Adults could play it too. And we were also featured as the free app of the day a few times, while on Google Play, I don't think we were actually featured at all. So being featured can be a huge impact on an app. And so just real quick, if maybe you have a game and you're looking to do some of this stuff, we're starting to get into the business of publishing games or apps in the US or China. So if you're interested in that, come see me, or maybe you can get on our website and you can learn more that way too. So that's it. If we have some time for some questions, it looks like we have about 5 minutes or so. There's 2 microphones right here if anybody wants to go for it.
So what about the process of actually getting into the stores in China? Can you tell, that's the thing that we've struggled with the most. Can you tell us about the process for doing that?
Yeah, and that's where a relationship is important with the App Store. Some of them might have a loose web portal where you upload the APK, but it's nothing like in the US where everything is automated. A lot of times they'll actually email a link to a person and they will take it and put it on their store. I mean, that's where it's kind of difficult to do this without having some people in China to help you.
So all those 30 stores, all the stores in China, what if you don't have the resource to target them all? Can you target 3 and it'll be good enough?
Yeah, I think you could target maybe. Yeah, it's always good. Maybe you target 3 as a starting point, and if you're making good revenue, you can move to the 4th or the 5th. But you're not going to get anywhere like maybe you want to be able to cover maybe 2/3 of them, 2/3 of users, and it's hard to do that without targeting a lot of stores. So.
One of the problems we've been having with China is if you have a server to store data, that server has to be in China. Do you have any companies you've worked with for having a local store somewhere in China?
Yeah, I should have put a slide on this. Windows Azure is actually in China now, but it's a strange situation to get it set up. It is separated from the US Western version because they require some level of access to the servers, the Chinese government does. But you can get Azure in China, and it works the same. Instead of going to windowsazure.com, you go to, it's like windowsazure.cn. And I've deployed from Visual Studio to Azure in China, just like, you have. It's not quite as nice, like you can't create, the website instance from Visual Studio, but you can definitely publish from Visual Studio. But that's kind of a little-known thing. The other option is to use the Hong Kong data center, which works pretty well. I think both Azure and Amazon have a data center there. But I think the internet from mainland China to Hong Kong is not always 100% reliable, but it could work fairly well for your app. Well, if that's it, thank you guys. Thanks for coming out.